All right, we are back with Dzana. Now, Dzana, on top of writing and producing, you're also an activist who identifies as queer, bi, Asian, and you're an adoptee with an interest in community building. What does community building look like for you, and what kinds of communities and spaces do you want to see more of in the future?
Yeah, community building for me, I mean, that's sort of a borrowed term on my part. I think that there's a lot of different meanings for it. So for me personally, it's really about there's a lot of different, again, as we've been discussing, like there's a lot of different facets to, an individual. There's a lot of intersectionality particularly within the queer community that I've learned. And I really want to be able to kind of work symbiotically with
Mhm.
everyone. Yeah, I want to be able to work symbiotically with all these different aspects and with everyone, and recognize that we're all coming from different experiences. In certain cases, particularly with what we're seeing right now, some
Mhm.
people's voices really do need to be amplified. Some people's, need to be supported in different ways. But even beyond what's happening right now, like kind of what's in the current news, I think one thing that COVID in particular has made me think about is the disability or the experience of the people in the disabled community.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously that kind of again spans a wide range. Like whenever we say these sort of like blanket statement terms,
Mhm.
that spans such a huge range. Just like me being part of all those things that you mentioned, I'm
Mhm.
not only am I part of one of those communities, I'm part of so many of them.
Mhm.
And like really recognizing, I think growing up I was like, wow, I'm like the only intersectional human being that I will ever meet ever, because I was a child. And like also, I did grow up in a very homogenous community, for the most part, in my around my like adopted neighborhood in Oregon.
Mhm.
And then I got older, and then I used my eyes and used my ears and my various other senses that I'm lucky to have, and started to recognize, no, other people are parts of these other communities too, or other people have their own intersections. And even
Mhm.
within these communities, like literally, I mean, I'm using the queer community because we've literally like we listed out, it's like LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Mhm.
QIAA, and on and on and on. And that's amazing, but that also means that we actually have to make space for every single person who identifies with one or more
Mhm.
of those um, letters, or like doesn't really quite fit in, but knows that they don't fit in somewhere else. And so, again, for me, it's more, I'm not necessarily, I don't think of myself as like someone who knows all the answers, I guess, to that kind of question, who knows like, oh, what communities need to be highlighted more, or who needs to be organizing where. I'm learning like where these communities already exist, who's organizing in like the queer spaces, who's organizing in the Filipino spaces, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. And I refer to myself in a message within this week as like a baby organizer, because I am. I'm baby, as the meme goes. But like, yeah, I'm really learning, and that's something that is really important. I think whether or not you're an organizer, particularly if you're a storyteller, we are always learning. We always have to listen. We always have to educate ourselves. Yes, there's going to be people in these communities and in our communities who are going to reach out and help educate us, but a lot of the onus is on ourselves, particularly because we've either not been able to have the education that we need, or the education that we were given was
Mhm.
like a blatant lie,
Mhm.
sometimes a mixture of the two. And so, we're very lucky that we live in a time when, if we do have access to technology, a lot of these resources are online, as you're probably seeing on social media right now, particularly specific to like how you can support the Black community, or how you can help defund the police and create new ways of supporting the community. But I mean, even within this sort of the defund police, and then this other idea of what's that world going to look like, that is where I see community building, because there's this idea of having people who understand, who actually are going to be able to come in and take care of folks, instead of like come and like kill them, because of their own biases that have existed for many many years. And like we have to create a space where people like where those care workers can exist and learn, and where, uh, yeah, and where we can maybe make some mistakes so that we get better at knowing how to take care of each other. Because I think kind of at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is, you know, taking care of each other. But how do you do that if you don't know how? And the answer is like you learn, and it
Mm-hmm.
is not easy, but we do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very long process. I mean, I'm really glad that you're repeating the importance of really stepping into this movement and looking at yourselves constantly as a student. It's easy to go on Twitter and read someone's thread and you're like, oh shit, I know everything about this thing. But as you dive deeper and as you meet more people from the community, you're just like, wow, there is still so much. There's so many roles that a lot of us can fill, and I think that's one of the great things is that there is definitely space for everybody. As a New Yorker, you've got front row seats to this massive protest that's been, going and sweeping all 50 states in support of Black Lives Matter and in protest of police brutality. Given your passion for community organization and knowing how much our communities need help, what advice would you give to activists who want to protect marginalized communities?
Particularly in relation to everything that's going on currently, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and with other, organizing within, like, supporting the Black community in general, since Black Lives Matter is, one of many, the overarching kind of movement, but, there's so many that are involved. There's so many organizations,
Mm-hmm.
that are involved. I think particular specific to this movement, I think really listening again to the Black community, and then if you're organizing within a community that is further like intersectional beyond that, like, listening to the voices, even, yeah, listening to those voices is so integral, and that's something, that continues to be something that I have to remind myself. I really have to be like, well, I'm uncomfortable right now.
Mm-hmm.
No one, I don't think anyone's okay. Nope. I think there's some people who are hanging out and being comfortable, and like, we don't have to talk about that. But like, no one's stoked about anything that's going on. No one was
Yeah.
stoked about COVID before. No one was excited about the fact that like COVID was killing certain communities, like Black and brown communities, like at much higher rates. No one was excited. No one was really excited about that even before COVID. But now it's just come to a forefront where we're like, wow, we can really talk about this. We can actually have conversations about this. Other people, like, our jobs are not going to come at us for it, or like we don't
Mm-hmm.
even have our jobs because they, like, laid us off or furloughed us in the middle of another crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, like, for me, again, going back to that, like, educating myself, there's so many resources out there. Sharing those resources with other people, talking about them, making space for myself, but by myself or with certain communities so that I can recharge. And then giving that space or creating that space for people who also need to recharge. I think are such important aspects of whether or not you're organizing or you're an activist or you're just going to, like, you're sending your, you're doing stuff remotely. It's one, honestly, it's probably never ever, it's going to be a long time before it feels like anything that we're doing is enough. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we really, really, really have to understand that just because it maybe feels like it's not enough, or it feels like you don't know what to do. And when I say you, I mean me. Doesn't mean that we should just stop.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that we should, and even if you take a break, that doesn't mean that the break lasts forever. We have to figure out ways that we're going to continue to give back to the Black community and to other communities and to our own communities, and ask for that and learn to ask for that in ways that are, like, actionable. And yeah, and really see this as an example of, like, a major tipping point, and recognize, and also look at all these futures that, that other activists who've come before us. I mean, I would say, I just want to, like, give a shout out to, like, Adrienne Maree Brown, whose work, they wrote Pleasure Activism and Emergent Strategy, and edited Octavia's Brood, which is like, anthology of short stories written by other organizers and activists, science fiction focused short stories. Like, I really want to shout both, like, Adrienne Marie Brown and the community who was in Octavia's Brood out, because I think that reading those books and those stories and recognizing here's what a future could look like and here's what people are actually using. Here are like creative and also active and organizer focused voices doing the work that like I didn't even know was an option, and I'm a writer. Like you can think about the future. Sci-fi isn't just about the fiction, it's about what's possible. Fantasy isn't just about like the imagination, it's about what we can imagine is possible, which Octavia Butler, that's, I mean, I started reading her stuff a couple years ago and my mind was literally blown. I was like, wow, we can really reimagine the entire world. And some of this is not impossible. And yes, some of it is like, there is so much trauma and so much like hurt and pain in some of these stories, but that doesn't mean that we can't like think that way, and we can't, like, why not, you know? I mean, that's, I mean, I'm obviously I'm being political, but like that's something that I say to my family is like, why, or to, no, not just my family, but we'll use my family as an example. Like, why not look at why do you say it's not possible when what you really say is it's not possible in the systems that we currently have in place? Like, and then why not think about how we change those systems? Why do we stop there? Like, those were built on the backs of Black and Brown communities. Why don't we just keep, like, why don't we get rid of that and build something new together, not taking advantage of each other, actually communicating, actually learning? So those are my really short, that's my advice. Yes. I don't feel strongly about it at all. I don't have feelings at all. It's just really listening and then using your imagination. Like, we are storytellers. That is what we do. So like, let's do it. Yeah.
Now, I love this idea of, you know, seeing yourself in these communities and, you know, recognizing that the best way to really integrate is to sort of ebb and flow with the community, you know, like not to always feel like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to push. Like, you have to sort of look at these communities and assess like, okay, like maybe this isn't the right time to be talking about that. I think sort of an example for me is like running the page. I have to really keep in mind how I'm feeling about certain issues and my mental health, and how the content I make and how emotionally charged I make it might impact everybody else. And so it's like, you know, sometimes I might be on this spree where I'm talking about, I'm shitting on cops or I'm shitting on white people, but like I know that it could be kind of stressful. So I think like part of being a community is really being intuitive to how the community feels, and you really can't do that unless you're actually speaking to people and listening to people and really being in tune to what they are saying.